They said I was too shy to lead right to my face during the quarterly all-hands meeting while I was standing 3 feet away from the microphone I'd been reaching for to present the data visualization project that had saved them 18 months of manual reporting and roughly $400,000 in consulting fees. Instead, Trevor, the newly minted VP of Strategic Initiatives, swooped in like a seagull claiming a dropped sandwich and announced that leadership requires presence. And unfortunately, some people just aren't built for the spotlight before gesturing vaguely in my direction, like I was a potted plant that had wandered into the wrong conference room. The room went silent. Not the respectful kind. The kind where everyone suddenly finds their shoes fascinating and pretends they didn't just witness a public execution by corporate buzzword. I stood there frozen, holding my color-coded presentation folder like it was evidence in a trial I was losing. The worst part wasn't the humiliation, though, that burned like cheap coffee on an empty stomach. The worst part was watching my own team. My team, the people I trained, debugged code with, and covered for during their messy divorces and family emergencies, just sit there nodding like Trevor had just announced the weather, not like he'd just declared me professionally invisible in front of the entire product division. I'm talking about Elena, who I'd personally walked through 3 crisis deployments when our legacy system crashed during Black Friday. I'm talking about Jasper, who still sent me Slack messages at midnight when his APIs threw tantrums and needed someone who actually understood the difference between correlation and causation to untangle the mess. I'm talking about Dante from QA, who called me his debugging wizard after I spent an entire weekend reverse engineering a third-party integration that was hemorrhaging user data faster than a broken dam. All of them just sitting there like I was furniture that had briefly tried to speak before being reminded of its place. If you're nodding along thinking been there, survived that, hit that subscribe button, because apparently 97% of you are lurking like workplace ghosts, and I'm trying to hit 10,000 subscribers before Trevor finds another potted plant to publicly humiliate. Anyway, back to my corporate crucifixion. So there I was, holding my presentation that detailed how our new automated reporting pipeline had eliminated the need for the entire business intelligence contractor team Trevor had been championing for months. The same team that charged us more per hour than most people make in a week to produce charts that looked like they were designed by someone who thought Excel was a foreign language. But did I mention that? No. Of course not, because shy people don't interrupt when the big kids are talking. Instead, I watched Trevor commandeer my presentation slide deck, which he'd somehow gotten his hands on, probably through Jasper, who forwarded everything to everyone, like he was running a corporate gossip blog, and present my work as a collaborative team effort led by his visionary leadership. I watched him stumble through technical concepts he clearly didn't understand, explaining machine learning algorithms, like he was describing how to make a peanut butter sandwich to a toddler, while the actual stakeholders in the audience, people who'd worked with me directly on this project, just nodded politely, like they were watching a community theater production of Hamlet performed by middle schoolers. The kicker came when Rhonda from finance asked a detailed question about data normalization, and Trevor looked around the room like he was searching for a life preserver before his eyes landed on me. And he said with the confidence of a man who'd never experienced consequences in his adult life, "That's exactly the kind of detailed implementation question our technical lead could address," and gestured for me to stand up and explain my own work while he took credit for the strategic vision. That's when something cracked. Not my composure that was already shattered, but something deeper. Something that had been holding me back for the 3 years I'd been at this company. The part of me that believed being quiet was the same as being professional. That doing good work would eventually speak for itself. That competence would naturally rise to the surface like cream in milk. Spoiler alert, competence doesn't rise. It gets buried under the loud voices of people who think confidence and volume are the same thing. I answered Rhonda's question thoroughly professionally and with the kind of technical precision that made Trevor's earlier explanation sound like he'd been speaking in crayon. But as I sat back down, I wasn't thinking about data normalization anymore. I was thinking about the org chart, the budget allocations, the upcoming reorg that everyone knew was coming, but nobody wanted to talk about. And specifically, I was thinking about the fact that Trevor's entire division, the one he'd been building with expensive contractors and flashy presentations, was about to become redundant thanks to the automated systems I'd been quietly building while he was busy managing up and managing out anyone who might threaten his narrative of indispensable leadership. See, the thing about being underestimated is that people stop paying attention to what you're actually doing. They see what they expect to see: a shy technical person who's good with databases and bad with people, someone who can build the engine but shouldn't be trusted to drive the car, someone who's valuable as long as they stay in their lane and don't get ideas above their station. What they don't see is that shy people are often observers. We watch. We listen. We notice patterns and inconsistencies. We see the gap between what people say in meetings and what actually gets done. We understand systems, not just technical ones, but organizational ones, political ones, financial ones. And when you combine that observational skill with deep technical knowledge and a growing sense of righteous fury, you get something dangerous. You get someone who knows exactly where the bodies are buried and has the tools to dig them up. That night, I went home to my studio apartment with its view of the dumpster behind the Chinese restaurant and did something I'd never done before. I opened a bottle of wine. Not the cheap stuff from the corner store, but the good bottle I'd been saving for a promotion that apparently was never coming, and I started mapping out exactly how screwed Trevor's division really was. I pulled up the budget reports I had access to thanks to my involvement in the automation project, cross-referenced them with the contractor invoices that came through our approval workflow, and started building a picture that would have made investigative journalists weep with joy. Trevor's strategic initiatives weren't just expensive, they were redundant, inefficient, and in some cases actively counterproductive. The business intelligence contractors he'd hired were producing reports that contradicted the data. Our automated systems generated daily. The strategic consulting firm he'd brought in to optimize our workflow had recommended changes that would have broken the very automation that was saving us hundreds of thousands of dollars. And the leadership development program he championed, the one where he'd proclaimed that some people aren't built for the spotlight, was costing more per participant than most people's annual salaries, while producing no measurable improvements in team performance, retention, or productivity. But here's the beautiful part. None of this was hidden. It was all there in the systems I'd built, documented in the reports I generated, accessible through the dashboards I'd designed. Trevor had been so busy managing his image and positioning himself as a strategic visionary that he'd never bothered to understand how the actual work got done, or what it cost, or whether it was necessary. And because everyone assumed I was just a quiet, technical person who wouldn't cause trouble, nobody had thought to limit my access to the financial data that flowed through our integrated systems. I spent the weekend building what I called my transparency report, though in my head I was calling it Operation Karma, a comprehensive analysis of resource allocation, efficiency metrics, and cost-benefit calculations across all strategic initiatives. Over the past 18 months, it was dry, professional, and utterly devastating. Every chart told the same story. Trevor's vision was expensive. His execution was flawed, and his results were non-existent. The automated systems had not only replaced the need for most external contractors, but had revealed how much money was being wasted on initiatives that sounded strategic, but delivered nothing measurable by Sunday night. I had 43 pages of data-driven evidence that Trevor's entire division was an expensive solution to problems that no longer existed or had never existed in the first place. And unlike his presentations, this one was backed by numbers that actually added up by Monday morning. I had a plan. Not a revenge fantasy, but a professional strategic plan. Because the thing about being underestimated in corporate America is that you're often underestimated by people who are themselves overpaid, underqualified, and completely dependent on systems they don't understand. Which means when you do understand those systems, when you've built them, maintained them, and quietly improved them while everyone else was playing politics, you have something more powerful than charisma or connections. You have leverage. I didn't march into Trevor's office guns blazing. That's not how quiet people operate. Instead, I sent a calendar invite to Rhonda from finance, the woman who'd asked the technical question. Trevor couldn't answer. Subject line: budget efficiency, analysis, and resource optimization opportunities. 30 minutes informal. I attached a summary report. Not the full 43 pages, just enough to pique her interest and suggest that there might be significant cost savings opportunities worth exploring. Rhonda responded within an hour. Sounds interesting. Can we include Patricia from operations and Maxwell from strategic planning just to get broader perspective on resource allocation? I smiled at my computer screen for the first time in months. Of course, I replied. The more stakeholders, the better. When you're dealing with organization-wide efficiency opportunities. The meeting was set for Wednesday morning, same conference room where I'd been publicly dismissed as too shy to lead, same table where Trevor had stolen credit for my work, same projector where he'd stumbled through explanations of systems he'd never built. I spent Tuesday night rehearsing. Not because I was nervous about the technical content. I could explain data, visualization, and process automation in my sleep, but because I was preparing for the moment when Trevor realized what was happening, when he understood that the quiet technical person had just systematically dismantled his entire professional narrative using nothing but math and transparency. Turns out I didn't have to wait long. When I walked into the conference room Wednesday morning, Trevor was already there, sitting at the head of the table like he owned it, which technically he did, until someone with access to budget reports and efficiency metrics started asking inconvenient questions. Rhonda and Patricia were reviewing printed copies of my summary report. Maxwell was pulling up the detailed dashboard I'd shared, asking clarifying questions about methodology and data sources. Trevor was smiling like a man who thought he was about to watch someone else get fired, which I suppose in a way he was just not the person he expected. "What's this about Maya?" he said, using my name for probably the third time in the 3 years we'd worked together. "Just some analysis Rhonda requested," I replied, calm as lake water on a windless day. "Efficiency review across strategic initiatives, nothing complicated. Just wanted to make sure our resource allocation aligns with measurable outcomes." Trevor's smile flickered like a light bulb with loose wiring. "Great team collaboration," he said, though something in his voice suggested he was beginning to suspect this wasn't going to be the kind of collaboration where he got to take credit and I got to stay invisible. I opened my laptop, connected to the projector, and pulled up the first slide. Not a fancy design template, just clean professional charts that let the data speak for itself. Resource allocation analysis across strategic initiatives, fiscal year, breakdown by category ROI calculations based on measurable outcomes. Trevor shifted in his seat. Rhonda leaned forward. Patricia started taking notes. The first chart showed contractor costs by month over the past 18 months, a steady climb that peaked right around the time Trevor had been promoted to VP. The second chart showed measurable outcomes from those contractor engagements. Deliverables completed. Projects finished, goals achieved. The line was essentially flat expensive. Flat, the third chart showed the cost savings from automated systems over the same period, a sharp downward trend that had accelerated as the automation became more sophisticated. As I'd optimized the algorithms and eliminated manual processes, the numbers spoke for themselves. Trevor's strategic initiatives had cost the company nearly $2 million over 18 months while producing results that could be measured in press releases and stakeholder updates, but not in actual improved efficiency or cost savings. Meanwhile, the automation project. The one I'd built and maintained had saved over $4 million in contractor costs alone, not counting the reduction in errors, the improvement in processing time, or the elimination of redundant workflows. I clicked to the next slide, detailed breakdown by initiative with cost per outcome ratios. Trevor's leadership development program, $8,000 per participant, 0. Measurable improvement in team performance. The business intelligence contractor team, $1,200 per report, to produce analysis that contradicted our automated systems in 63% of cases. The strategic consulting engagement, $14,000 for recommendations that would have broken existing automation and increased processing time by an estimated 47%. Rhonda was no longer just taking notes. She was calculating. Patricia was asking questions about specific line items. Maxwell was pulling up budget projections on his laptop to cross-reference. My numbers. Trevor was very quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when someone realizes they're not the predator. In this meeting, they're the prey. But I wasn't done. Not even close, because the thing about being underestimated by someone who's been coasting on confidence and connections is that they usually haven't bothered to understand what you're actually capable of when you're not being interrupted, dismissed, or relegated to implementation of their strategic vision. The next section of my presentation focused on organizational efficiency. Specifically, the overlap between Trevor's strategic initiatives and existing automated systems. It turned out that 68% of the work being done by external contractors could be handled by systems I'd already built. The remaining 32% could be automated within 60 days using existing infrastructure and open source tools. The strategic consulting recommendations weren't just expensive, they were obsolete. The problems they were designed to solve had been resolved months ago by automation solutions that were already running in production. The leadership development program was producing no measurable improvements in any relevant metric, but was consuming budget that could fund 3 additional automation engineers or 2 senior data scientists who could eliminate the need for additional external analytics. Contractors, I clicked through slide after slide, each one a nail in the coffin of Trevor's strategic vision, until finally I reached the summary page, total potential annual savings from discontinuing current strategic initiatives and expanding automation capabilities. $7.2 million improved processing efficiency, reduced error, rates faster, time to market, and elimination of redundant workflows with measurable ROI. Within 90 days, the room was silent. Trevor looked like he'd been hit by a freight train carrying his own performance review. Rhonda was smiling, the kind of smile accountants get when they find ways to save millions of dollars. Patricia was already drafting what looked like an email to senior leadership. Maxwell was bookmarking my dashboard links and asking if he could schedule follow-up meetings to discuss implementation timelines. I closed my laptop and looked directly at Trevor for the first time since the meeting started. Looks like there are some significant opportunities for strategic realignment, I said, my voice steady. Professional? Utterly calm, might be worth discussing how we prioritize initiatives based on measurable outcomes rather than presentation skills. Trevor opened his mouth, then closed it, then opened it again like a fish trying to remember how to breathe. Rhonda stood up first. Maya, this is exactly the kind of analysis we need more of. Can you put together a formal recommendation for the executive team? Patricia nodded enthusiastically, and I'd like to discuss integrating some of these efficiency metrics into our quarterly reviews. Maxwell was already pulling out his phone to check his calendar for available meeting slots. And I want to schedule time to go through the automation roadmap in detail. This could accelerate our digital transformation timeline by months. Trevor finally found his voice. This seems like something that should be coordinated through proper channels, he stammered. Strategic initiatives require broader stakeholder input, not just technical analysis. Rhonda looked at him like he'd just suggested they make financial decisions based on astrology readings. Trevor, this is broader stakeholder input, she said patiently. We're looking at organization-wide efficiency improvements with concrete ROI projections backed by actual performance data. Patricia chimed in, and it's exactly the kind of analysis we should be doing before approving strategic initiatives, not after we've already spent the budget. Maxwell was nodding along. This is the most comprehensive resource allocation analysis I've seen since I started here. The methodology is solid, the data is clean, and the recommendations are actionable. I looked around the table at 3 senior stakeholders who were treating my analysis like gospel, and Trevor, who was beginning to understand that his strategic vision had just been systematically dismantled by the quiet technical person he'd publicly dismissed as too shy to lead. The irony wasn't lost on me. That the same presentation skills he'd mocked my attention to detail he'd dismissed as too technical. My understanding of systems he'd written off as narrow implementation focus were now being praised as exactly what the organization needed for strategic decision-making. But here's the thing about revenge. Served cold and backed by data, it doesn't feel like revenge. It feels like justice. Trevor left the meeting early, claiming he had another urgent strategic call, which everyone understood meant he was going to panic update his resume and probably call his father to see if the family construction business was still hiring Rhonda. Scheduled a follow-up meeting with senior leadership for Friday. Patricia asked me to prepare a detailed implementation timeline. Maxwell wanted to discuss budget reallocation and potential automation expansion across other divisions. By Thursday morning, I had 3 separate emails asking if I'd be interested in leadership development opportunities. One from HR, one from Patricia, and one from Rhonda's boss, who'd heard about the efficiency analysis and wanted to discuss organizational optimization strategies. Trevor sent one email too. A resignation announcement distributed to the entire product division. Effective immediately to pursue new opportunities in strategic consulting. I almost felt bad for him. Almost. But then I remembered standing in that conference room 3 weeks ago holding my presentation folder while he announced that some people just aren't built for the spotlight. Turns out he was right. Some people aren't built for the spotlight. They're built for something better. They're built to design the stage, control the lighting, and decide who gets to perform, and when you underestimate someone who understands how the theater actually works, you might find yourself performing your final act without realizing the curtain's already falling. The executive presentation went exactly as I'd hoped, which is to say, it went exactly as the data suggested it would when you replace strategic vision with measurable outcomes, emotional appeals with cost-benefit analysis and personality-driven leadership, with systems thinking. The results are pretty predictable. I stood at the front of the conference room where 3 weeks earlier, Trevor had dismissed me as too shy to lead and presented 43 pages of analysis that had evolved into a comprehensive digital transformation roadmap with specific timelines, budget allocations, and success metrics. The audience was different this time: senior leadership, finance, operations, and strategy. People with titles that actually meant something and budgets that actually mattered. People who understood that in business, results matter more than rhetoric and efficiency. Trump's charisma. Every time Rhonda introduced me not as the quiet technical person, but as the lead architect of our automation initiative, the woman who'd saved the company millions in contractor costs while building systems that had improved efficiency across multiple departments. Her words, not mine. Though I'd be lying if I said they didn't feel like vindication wrapped in professional validation. Patricia followed up by explaining how my analysis had revealed optimization opportunities they'd been missing. Systematic inefficiencies that were costing them millions in unnecessary contractor fees, and redundant strategic initiatives that sounded impressive but delivered no measurable value. Maxwell presented the timeline for expanding automation capabilities across other divisions using my systems as the foundation and my methodology as the template for evaluating all future strategic investments based on concrete ROI rather than presentation skills and strategic vision. When they asked questions, they asked me technical questions, budget questions, implementation questions, timeline questions. The kind of questions that require deep understanding of systems, financial modeling, and practical execution. Not the kind of questions you can answer with buzzwords and management speak. When the senior VP of operations asked about scalability, I didn't gesture vaguely at the technical team and hope someone else would explain the details. I walked them through capacity planning, load balancing, and infrastructure requirements, with the confidence of someone who'd actually built these systems from scratch. When the CFO asked about cost projections, I didn't deflect to finance. I pulled up spreadsheets I'd built, showed them the formulas, explained the variables, and demonstrated how I'd calculated savings estimates based on historical data and measurable performance improvements. When the chief technology officer asked about integration challenges, I didn't promise to circle back with a more detailed analysis. I explained API architectures, data flow diagrams, and migration strategies with the authority of someone who'd actually solved these problems. Not just managed people who solved them by the end of the presentation. They weren't just approving my recommendations, they were asking me to lead the implementation. Patricia offered me Trevor's old position on the spot, Senior Director of Strategic Automation and Process Optimization Reporting, directly to the VP of Operations with budget authority over all automation initiatives and contractor evaluations. Rhonda asked if I'd be interested in cross-training with the finance team to develop better efficiency metrics for evaluating strategic investments across the entire organization. Maxwell wanted me to consult on similar analysis for his division and possibly others depending on results. The CEO, who'd been quiet through most of the presentation, leaned forward and asked one question. Maya, why haven't we been having these conversations sooner? I looked around the room at executives who were treating my technical expertise as strategic insight, my detailed analysis as leadership capability, and my quiet competence as exactly what they needed for organizational transformation. Because I said, meeting his eyes directly. Some people thought I was too shy to lead. Turns out they were measuring the wrong things. The room was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that happens when everyone realizes something important has shifted. Not just about budget allocations or strategic initiatives, but about who gets to speak and who gets heard, about what leadership actually looks like when it's based on results rather than presentation skills. The CEO smiled. It was a small smile, but genuine. Looks like we need to recalibrate our understanding of leadership, he said, glancing around the table at the other executives who were nodding in agreement. Maya, welcome to senior leadership. I hope you're ready to shake some things up. I thought about Trevor probably somewhere updating his LinkedIn profile with strategic consulting buzzwords and vague references to digital transformation initiatives he'd never actually implemented. I thought about my old team, Elena, Jasper, Dante, who'd sat silently while I was dismissed and were now sending congratulatory Slack messages like they'd always believed in my potential. I thought about all the quiet, competent people in organizations everywhere who were being overlooked. While loud, incompetent people got promoted based on confidence rather than capability. I looked around the table at executives who were already discussing budget reallocations, automation expansion, and efficiency metrics, and realized something profound had shifted, not just in my career, but in how this organization would evaluate leadership going forward. I'm ready, I said. And for the first time in 3 years, I wasn't trying to make my voice smaller or my presence less noticeable. I was ready to lead, and this time nobody was going to mistake competence for shyness or confuse volume with value. Thanks for watching, you beautiful workplace revolutionaries. Smash that subscribe button. Unless you're Trevor. In which case, maybe focus on updating that resume, and remember, quiet doesn't mean powerless. It just means we're listening until we're ready to speak. And when we do, you better believe we've got receipts.